Okay. All right. Hey there, folks. Even with conventions, readings, and other author type events back in action, I figured I'd keep bringing book tour to you. So welcome to Russ's Rockin Rollercoaster Season 9, intriguing interviews with creative minds. Now, for those of you who are familiar with my work, and for those who are just seeing me for the first time, for the last several years, I've been writing the Angela Hardwick series. You can see the books right back there, about a female hard-boiled private eye with a sci-fi twist. Now, along those travels, I've discovered that while both science fiction and mystery are incredibly popular genres unto themselves, questions remain about how or if they go together. So that's why tonight we'll be talking about blending genres, sci-fi and mystery. And to help us deconstruct what's going on here, please welcome back my pal and the Edgar Award-nominated author and iconic filmmaker, NICHOLAS MEYER. Nick has written several Sherlock Holmes novels, including The 7% Solution, The West End Horror, and The Return of the Pharaoh, among others. He is also the writer and director of such classic movies as The 7% Solution, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, Time After Time, and the harrowing nuclear war TV movie The Day After. Welcome back, Nick.
Thank you. I didn't direct The 7% Solution. I merely adapted the screenplay from my novel. Herb Ross was the director.
Fair enough, my bad. All right. Also on our panel is USA Today and international best-selling author Alison Gaylin. Alison has won both the Edgar and Seamus Awards, and her short stories have been chosen for Best American Mysteries and Suspense and Best Mystery Stories of the Year. And her book, The Collective, has been optioned by Yellowbird UK for a development as a TV series. Welcome, Alison.
Thank you.
All right. And rounding out our panel is my pal and hard-boiled poet, Reed FARREL Coleman. Reed is a New York Times bestselling author of 31 novels, including 6 in Robert P. Parker's Jesse Stone series. He is also a 4-time recipient of the Seamus Award, has won the Scribe, Audie, McCavity, Anthony, and Barry Awards, and is a 2-time Thriller Award nominee and a 4-time Edgar Award nominee. Welcome back, Reed.
I didn't, nor did I direct The 7% Solution.
All right, good. We've got that straight away. All right, that's why I brought you on, to keep me guys straight. All right, heads up to the folks at home. Feel free to send me notes or questions for the panel you have in the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. Now, before we kind of get started, as I mentioned in the opening, I am passionate about the blending of sci-fi and mystery. Call it a one-man crusade, if you will, looking to convert any non-believers. But what's fascinating to me is that, as a fan of both genres, is that generally speaking, okay, I'm not talking everyone, but generally speaking, sci-fi fans are open to most other genres, including mystery, crime, and thrillers. And for the sake of brevity during tonight's show, when I say mystery, I'm including traditional mystery, noir, crime, and thrillers under that description. However, many fans of what we'll call traditional mysteries are either somewhat reluctant or even outright dismissive of sci-fi and are skeptical of blending them together, which is why I gathered this particular panel of heavyweights. So Nick, you already play in the sci-fi mystery space. Reed is a mystery author with a sci-fi background, whereas Alison is not a sci-fi person at all. Okay, so with that preamble, Reed, you're a fan of both genres, but as of now, anyway, you focus as an author on crime and mystery. Why do you think that fans of traditional crime and mystery have such a hard time embracing sci-fi?
Well, first of all, let me say the following. Alison rejects sci-fi, but she is an alien. So
You're not supposed to say that.
That is not really widely known, but that's the fact. I think that actually the issue comes down to this, and this has always been my issue with most sci-fi, is sci-fi, even the best sci-fi writers, are more concerned about the concept than the beauty of the writing. And I think mystery writers, while not all of us are concerned about that, really sometimes don't give the weight to the concept and focus more on the mystery and the things like that. And that is not to say, I do write science fiction stories, And B, I don't think that I hate making broad strokes generalizations, but even someone like Philip K. Dick, who, has genius concepts in his books, and his writing's not, in my opinion, not that great.
Right. So Nick, also, so you're also, you play in both spaces and a dabbling of both. What's in your travels, what's your take on why you think that, again, broadly speaking, that sort of the more traditionalist crime mystery reader is really reluctant, if not outright just rejects the idea that I don't want any sci-fi in my fiction here?
Well, I don't really know much about this aspect of the mystery reader rejecting science fiction literature. I must say that I'm not really a very big science fiction person myself. Jules Verne and H.G. Wells is about my speed. I think I agree with Reed that Philip K. Dick is sort of a brilliant conceptual thinker, but he's not a very good stylist, in my opinion. And I do think, as you suggest, that writers of mystery stories are somehow more concerned with style than writers of science fiction. The sort of case in point is if you read Michael Crichton, who again writes very imaginatively about science fiction, but the actual prose is for the reader like lifting cinder blocks. It's really not very user friendly, and any relation that I have to science fiction, and we should define it at some point, is sort of peculiarly accidental. I sort of fell into the Star Trek thing and learned by doing. And at one point, yes, I linked Spock with Holmes. You would have to be blind, deaf, and dumb not to note a certain resemblance. And I made a little joke about it that's lasted. But otherwise, I'm not sure that I have a lot of smart things to say. I should turn it over to Allison.
Well, actually, I am going to do that, but I have a follow-up for you, Nick. So I'm a big fan of your movies, in particular. So Time After Time, which features the character of H.G. Wells, and a time travel chase.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah,
right,
sorry.
for Jack the Ripper in modern times, and certainly Star Trek VI, which has a very clear Sherlockian element to the narrative. So in those two instances, anyway, where very clearly there was a blend of a mystery and there was a sci-fi component in both. In those two cases, at least, why do you think that those blended genres worked, at least in those cases?
Well, two things right off the bat. One is you're referring to movies, not books.
True.
And the question of style doesn't somehow apply in the same way. That's number one. Number two, I should say at the outset that the idea for Time After Time was not mine. I was given by a friend of mine, Carl Alexander, 65 pages and an outline of a novel that he was working on, which was the seed of this. And he asked me what I thought about the novel. And this is not something that I would have come up with in a gazillion years. But what I read, which was fascinating to me, was something where the premise was, I like where plot and themes are inextricably bound together. It's what I love about Graham Greene a lot, about John le Carré a lot. You cannot separate the plot from the theme. And what I recognized in Carl's manuscript was, number one, an idea that seemed more inherently cinematic than literary. And number two, something so simple that you just had two guys in Victorian costumes running around a modern day world in which everything they saw, and the audience is seeing it through their eyes, is science fiction. In this, I was influenced very heavily by a Jean-Luc Godard film that I saw in college. It wasn't part of my classes, but I saw it, called Alphaville with Eddie Constantine. And that was a sci-fi world, but everything looked the same, except it had sci-fi names on it. Hand me that communicator, and they would hand him a book. So I didn't think it up. I just tripped over it. I optioned his book, which was unfinished at the time, and then wrote the screenplay that I wanted. And I think what intrigued me was the chance to make a sort of five-faceted film that was a romance, it was a thriller, it was a comedy, it was science fiction, and it was a rather mordant social commentary, all wrapped up in this one premise that you couldn't get away from. The theme and the story was the same.
Right.
And Malcolm McDowell was the good guy for once.
Yes.
Yes, that's another story.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even in Time After Time, I mean, other than, using the actual time machine to, leap them forward, other than that, really, for the most part, that's kind of where the sci-fi predominantly begins and ends. Most of
And
them,
I wasn't very interested.
right.
I wasn't very interested in how he got from A to B.
Right.
I wasn't going to compete with George Pal or Stanley Kubrick or all these special effects masters, and this is before CGI. What I remember saying to my team was, if I could turn the theater into a radio at this moment, and I really believe that art always thrives on leaving things out or leaving things to the imagination. A painting does not move. Beethoven has no intellectual content. The missing piece is filled in by the listener, the reader, the auditor, whatever. So I thought, let's just do it with voices. If you hear Enrico Caruso, if you hear Adolf Hitler, if you hear Jimmy Carter, I don't know, and just put sort of colored lights going underneath it, which is more or less what we did, that could be the time travel. And that the science fiction didn't end there, because you have these people from the past plunked down in the present, but it was a different.
Well, that becomes it was more of a fish out of water story and less about the sci-fi part of it, right? They were just misplaced.
Well, as the Ripper says at one point to Wells, you didn't go forward, you went back. 90 years ago, I was a freak. Today, I'm an amateur. That's the sort of point of the movie.
Right, right. Okay, it's great. So
now you don't have to see it.
well, I just watched it the last time we chatted, and it's still great. So Allison, so you don't dabble in sci-fi at all, but so J.D. Robb, for example, has written one sci-fi mystery bestseller after another in her In-Depth series. When you think of science fiction, what jumps to mind? What jumps to your mind?
Well, I mean, I enjoy science fiction. I'm not adverse to it. I actually think your theory is interesting to me, that mystery readers refuse to read science fiction. I haven't necessarily seen that myself, and especially now, there's so much pressure about how and where we're going to set our stories, because we're living in such uncertain times. And do people want things that are set in the present, particularly during the pandemic? There were people that I had one scene from my last book that took place actually at the very beginning of the pandemic, and some readers were incredibly put off by that. The idea of setting something in the distant future, that's kind of escapism now, and it's sort of fascinating. And it's, all mystery and all genres involve some form of world building. I haven't done it, mainly because my editors aren't that interested in that for me. I would love to try my hand at a whole, at a post-apocalyptic landscape, or or some form of science fiction in which a crime happens. I think there are a lot of great ideas to be had, and you see more and more writers doing it. Russ being one example, but there are a lot out there that are blending genres a lot more, whether it's science fiction and crime fiction, or horror and crime fiction. And yeah, I mean, I read Ray Bradbury a lot when I was younger, and really actually enjoyed his writing quite a bit. I love a lot of science fiction movies, 2001 Space Odyssey, being one of my top 10 favorite movies ever. So I can't say that, I'm actually interested in hearing more about the idea that mystery readers just don't like science fiction, because I think that's an interesting
I think
theory.
actually what I was, if I to clarify, is that my experience has been that mystery writers in particular, that mystery readers are reluctant to read crime and mystery that's blended with science fiction. They kind of kind of like to be, at least in my experience, and again, I'm just talking broadly.
How do you account, if I may ask, and again, this is not literature, this is movies, but the Blade Runner movies, aren't they basically an attempt
Noir.
to
They're
science fiction with a detective story?
Yes,
they're noir
yes,
stories.
which we're absolutely going to get to for sure. 100%.
And I'm now rereading all of the Elijah Bailey books, which are Isaac Asimov's robot detective books, set in the future. Talk about a guy whose prose are not beautiful, but he's really good at storytelling. Just like Westerns are, detective novels, PI novels, which is what I was first known for. They're Westerns, and Westerns are tales of the round table. So I don't think that people, it always depends how it's presented to people, whether they'll like it or not. And I hate the whole pigeonholing thing, because one of my favorite authors, and I guarantee you, I'm sure one of Allison's and one of Nicholas's favorite, is Kurt Vonnegut, is a science fiction.
Absolutely.
And the mystery author. So, to me, it's always, publishing companies always want to pigeonhole you.
That's right.
And the fact is that authors often have no choice, because we get pigeonholed.
Right.
Our tastes are broader and our dreams are broader than what our agents and our publishers would let us do.
Actually, that was going to be my follow-up question to you, Allison. You started to touch on it. You said, "Oh, but my publishers don't want me to go there." Talk to me a little bit. So, have you actually had conversations with them about, expanding your reach a little bit? And they've just said,
in passing, I've thought of ideas that I've had. I don't know. I actually had this one science fiction idea that was based on something I learned about this certain type of cricket that they would go, they would go off together, this little group of crickets, and they would be assigned to like kill off the cricket that had the disease. And I'm like, what if there was a society like that? And what if, you were forced to kill off a loved one that had this type of disease, and how, and which lends itself to a science fiction type of setting. And, of course, my editor was like, oh, that's cool. Anyway, so I think that you get to whatever you sort of get published in is I mean you can switch a lot within the the crime fiction genre, but yeah, I mean I think it's great when when writers do sort of jump over into that and are able to do that, but at this point I haven't had the interest to allow myself to
was that you haven't had your interest, or the publisher hasn't had the interest?
the publisher hasn't had an interest in me writing science fiction.
Okay, but that doesn't mean you're not interested.
No, it doesn't at all. There are a lot of
She'd be
things.
the only one in the cricket mystery series. I mean, come on.
The murderous crickets, like
All right, so look, so following up kind of on what you were saying, though,
Post-apocalyptic cricket society.
so there are all these subgenres within the mystery umbrella, right? Whether it's cozy mystery or private eye, legal and medical thrillers, police procedurals, and on, which it pretty clearly demonstrates, at least to me, that, you know, there's a wide variety to choose from. But ultimately, I would submit that regardless of the subgenre, the success or failure of that one particular story typically comes down to the basics, right? Character and plot, right? And yet many traditional mystery lovers will acknowledge that, you know, that they saw or even enjoyed Blade Runner, The Terminator, The Twilight Zone, right? Possibly the most famous sci-fi noir thrillers we know of. So why is Blade Runner, Terminator, Twilight Zone, why are they cool? Whereas other potential sci-fi mysteries are just not so automatic.
I think Nicholas hit on it before, in that movies and books are different beasts. They're different animals. And I read you know, the Electric Sheep, you know, the Dream of Electric Sheep.
Do androids dream?
Do androids dream of
Right. That's right.
And
A much
you know
better
what?
title.
You would not recognize Blade Runner from that book. You just wouldn't.
It's very different.
It's very different. The concept's in there,
Yes.
but it's definitely, that's a completely different beast than Blade Runner. So
I think that movies, being essentially a visual medium,
right,
and as the repertoire of special effects has expanded to the point that you can depict anything now, you can depict anything. That's very friendly to the fantasy, the surreal, the special effects world. By the way, I'm not sure it's an advantage. I confess that I fell asleep in both versions of Blade Runner because the movies wouldn't let me in. I was seeing a relentless procession of perfect images with nothing left to the imagination. It was all spelled out for me, and I couldn't enter because they're also carried away now with what special effects can do, that they do the opposite of what I keep thinking successful artistic media need to do, which is to leave things out, to invite you to imagine. At the opening of Henry V, the chorus spells it out. Can this cockpit hold the vasty fields of France? On your imaginary forces work. Think when we speak of horses that you see them. And by the way, imagination needs no training. All you have to do is listen to the radio, hear a commercial about the ring around the collar, and you're there. You're there right away. But when movies, which get louder and the shots get shorter and the effects are sort of stunning, I think narrative somehow suffers. And things sort of fall by the wayside. And I think telling a story somehow suffers amid all the bells and whistles.
I mean, that certainly can be true. I'm not sure that's necessarily true in all cases, but there certainly are many examples where the sci-fi exists just for the sci-fi. So and we touched upon this a little bit. So Ray Bradbury's classic Fahrenheit 451, which today is still one of my all-time favorite books, is certainly sci-fi, but doesn't fit exactly into the mystery category, although you could argue that it belongs there. This dystopian narrative ultimately delves into the notion of society's fight to express ideas even when they're uncomfortable. And I can't think of anything more relevant in today's world. When you think of that classic story, what imagery, and Nick, this is where you were coming in, you know, what imagery comes to mind? And I'll start with Allison, who's sort of, you know, you're
well, if we're talking about the Truffaut movie.
No, I'm talking about the book.
It's been years since I read the book. I defer.
Well, I mean, everybody thinks of the burning of books when they, you know, if you're talking about imagery and in Fahrenheit 451, you know, that's sort of, the imagery that sticks with you. It's interesting to compare the imagery within movies and within books. When you're building a story in books, you don't have these sort of, you do have the world building at your disposal, but at the very core, you've got to tell a good story, so.
But literature invites you to imagine. The words are just symbols on a page. It's just code. They make you laugh or you cry when you decode them. That's how it works.
Yeah.
And movies is essentially the opposite.
I've always thought of writing as supplying enough information for a reader to make the movie in his or her head. And
What he said.
that is what our job is. And if we do it well, then it is what you leave out, because the whole thing about, and I do this in every talk, I give this when I do library talks, I talk about how reading is such an amazing thing, because we know it's artificial, it's words on a page, yet you're completely transported. If the writing is good, you're completely transported to places you've never been, to times you've never lived in. It's all about not giving too much information, but just enough information for the person to lose themselves in the words. So,
Can I
think
make
that
another
helps
distinction?
Sure, please.
I think detective literature, with obvious exceptions, delivers the exact opposite of what it promises. It promises thrills and chills and mysteries and the head bashed in by a blunt instrument wielded by persons unknown. And yet people take mystery stories to bed with them. It's a more intimate conjunction can hardly be imagined than to curl up with a good mystery. And I submit that the reason mystery stories are popular, not the only reason, but in many cases, is because unlike real life, in which things happen for no reason, and it's a random, arbitrary horror, which is how I see it, in detective stories, sooner or later, it all adds up. Detective stories attempt to make sense. Things don't happen without a reason, without a cause. And in science fiction, those rules don't apply. I raise this as a point of discussion. I don't know that it holds water.
But you don't feel that to me, like all fiction, especially genre fiction, is trying to kind of impose order on chaos. That's why we write crime fiction. It's like to make things make sense. And I think that's probably why it's so popular today, when so very little makes sense in the world.
My point.
Yeah. So, but I think that's probably true of science fiction too, though, isn't it? Isn't there,
Well, what about all that dystopian science fiction where it's post-nuclear and
but there are reasons for it, and
Yes.
then there's a result. Anything where you impose a narrative on something is comforting, I think. But I also,
that's a good point.
yeah, I also feel like fiction in general, but particularly like crime fiction, and why people like it so much and view it so much as an escape, is that it's very immersive. You're in it, especially like a great noir book or something like that. You're under the skin of the characters, and when you're writing, you're ideally you're describing everything with all five senses, which you can't do in a movie if that's visual. You want your reader to feel under the skin of these characters that are often in terrifying situations. So it's almost like it's like reverse escapism. Like you escape into this world that's worse than your own, and then you come back to your life and you're thinking, hey, it's not so bad.
There's no question you can read it in bed. You're safe. And I think generally characters in literature are capable of containing or sustaining more layers than they are in film, any kind of film, television, whatever. It's all surfaces.
Right, you go under their skin, you can go through the thought process, you can describe everything that they experience, whereas in a movie, I mean, just by the nature of it,
The,
you know.
the best films and the best film actors are those things that let you in. I'm thinking of, for example, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, the John Huston Bogart, nobody gets the best of Fred C. Dobbs. As you watch this character who starts off in one place, more or less sane, and who is slowly driven round the bend by greed that becomes paranoia, that becomes a lot of things, and you see it all happening in Humphrey Bogart's face, the way you could see things happening in Gary Cooper's face. And there are certain actors, even today, or especially today, who are even very good at that, but it still doesn't quite reach the sort of Crime and Punishment Dostoevskian level of what is going on inside Raskolnikov's
Yeah, and
head.
you're in there. Nobody wants
Yes.
to be Raskolnikov, but you're
Yeah.
in there, you know. You're
Yeah,
in
well,
his head.
the difference is, and I have often alluded to this, is film washes over you. You're not a real participant in a movie, no matter how good the movie is, and no matter how much a concert is great.
Mhm.
And we've all been at concerts in which we really get caught up in it, but it's still being played to us. And I was just at a performance a few weeks ago of the Alvin Ailey dance troupe. It's great to watch, but I'm not up there on the stage
Yeah.
and experiencing the dancing. And the thing is, in a book, especially first person novels, you are in the story. You are part of the story. And an author, Allison, and I know, Peter Spiegelman, once gave me a great compliment. He said, read your books are like two guys on a cross-country trip in which one is telling the other the story of what happened. So it's not, the best books are books that are very intimate, in which the reader feels you are speaking directly to only him or her.
There's
and not to a broad audience, but you're actually speaking to one person.
There's
Yeah.
an introduction to an annotated Sherlock Holmes that's written by John le Carré, who's one of my all-time favorite writers. And le Carré points out that Watson talks to you, and draws you in with that.
All right, so guys, let me ask. So that's an interesting point that you were talking about, especially with a lot of detective fiction. There's a lot of first person. So just as an example, let's say there's a series of books that have a sci-fi bent to them. There's some crime mystery, and it's a first person narrative. Do you think that you're going to be more intrigued to try that than any other form? Does that sort of help break down the barriers?
It's strange. I've written in first person. I've also written in second person, which is really wears the writer and the reader down. And I've written a lot in third person omniscient and third person close. I've written in all the forms. But to me, there's something very romantic.
That's right.
But not romantic, love romantic,
Right.
but romantic in the true sense of the word, the literary sense of it, about the one-on-one, the I'm speaking directly to you aspect of first person. But it presents all sorts of difficult problems, as Nicholas and Allison know, in that the only way the information can be passed to the reader is they can only know what the narrator.
Yeah, they have to be in every scene.
Right, they're in every scene, they're in every shot there.
Right.
So there, but I have a great affection for that because it's what I was known for. It's the thing I fell in love with Raymond Chandler, and Hammett. It's the thing I'm attracted to, though really good close third person does almost the same thing.
Allison, what about you?
Oh, I've written in both. My first book was first person, but then I did a lot of very close third. And the collective was all first person, and that was the first time I'd done that for a long time. And then, you know, my most recent book, I did a Robert Parker book that's coming out in June, which is the Sonny Randall book. And
Gee,
they're all,
I've never done that.
yeah, but yours were in the third person.
No, mine
right?
were third person. Mine were
Yeah,
third
yours
person.
are third person. And I mean, that's the Jesse Stone books are the ones that are in the third person. But
I've
mine-
never written a third person story novel, and I would like to. That's a goal of mine. If I, you know, live long enough, I'd like to. It's not what I'm working on now. It is another
Yeah, I
first
think it all
person.
depends on what story you want to tell. I mean, it's your little toolbox that you use. And the first time I wrote in third, you know, I realized I could switch points of view and create tension and play with the pacing that way, which is fun. It's like conducting an orchestra versus playing one, you know, piano. But then by the same token, you know, if you're, especially if you're writing a mystery and you really want to just, you know, have your reader completely surprised by things, it's a little easier, but it's also a real challenge because all your pacing and everything is coming out of this one point of view. You know, your whole story is coming out of this one point of view, and you might be dying, but still, when you're doing a first person story, you have to know what everybody else's point of view is and how it affects that person. So you're always writing omnisciently. It's just what you're choosing.
Yes,
That makes
I'm
sense.
actually I'm doing my first closed room novel. So 90,000 words in one confined space from first person.
And that's the first chapter.
Ooh, man, it's work.
That's a long time.
All right. So as we're getting, so now that, so modern society, if we have a society anymore, in many ways is becoming a real life sci-fi world with the integration of AI and SpaceX, and computers pretty much run the entire world. Are we in the fiction world, both as writers and readers, viewers, breaking down the barriers between the traditional mysteries and sci-fi, or are they still two very distinct genres that need to stick to their own lanes?
I will never argue for anybody having to stick to their own lane. So, you know, I think when you start, I mean, and I think Allison and Nicholas would agree, this is what we get pigeonholed. And Allison talked about it is publishers, and it's a business, you know, writing is art, publishing is a business. And
Right.
There's this kind of weird line, movable line and point where they meet. And the bottom line is publishers it's a business. They want to make money. So why they would ever publish me and still want to make money, I'm not sure. But they want you to do what you've done the last time. They know readers, they believe readers want meatloaf. And they want it every night for dinner. And I think
art is also a business. All art is an
Right.
uneasy combination of art and commerce. The Globe Theater was a money-making operation. If Henry VI Part 1 is a hit, then you get Henry VI
Right.
Part 2 and
That's
Henry
correct.
VI Part
Right.
3.
Right. And you get, you know, Friday the 13th, Part 13. So no, I mean, it's true. So I understand what's incumbent upon successful writers is understanding that that's the publisher's motivation for things. You know, there's a reason Lee Child and Andrew Child are working on book 24 and 25 because Jack Reacher is such a popular character. There's a reason Janet Ivanovich is at, you know, that she's running out of numbers. There's a reason Sue Grafton was running out of alphabet letters. She was going to start using the Greek alphabet. You know, theta is for, it's because people want what they like. And I've always been, you know, look, I do it. I supply what my readers want, but I would never argue for sticking in your own lane if you have. So I use short stories to write my science fiction.
So let's go back to that just for a second, and just a quick interlude for the folks who came in a little late. If you have any questions or comments, put them in the chat box and we'll get to a few at the end. So you're talking about from the publisher's point of view, right? They're running a business and they're going to make decisions based on what they believe is going to add to their bottom line. And while they're thinking, well, the readers want the meatloaf, are the publishers then doing the readers a disservice by pigeonholing us authors into boxes where we can't take more chances and do more of these blended stories or working in other genres? Are the readers actually suffering at the hands of the publishers?
Maybe you change your name. I mean, you mentioned JD Robb, she's doesn't write those JD Robb books under Nora Roberts, so maybe you change your name for the switching genres, or something. I don't know.
Nick, go ahead. You had something to say?
Always. I somehow just lost okay. So what I was going to say is that, number one, I don't think fans know what they want until they get it. When we were talking about whether Spock dies or stuff, we got threatening letters. If Spock dies, you die, whatever. And the French director Robert Bresson said, my job is not to find out what the public want and give it to them. My job is to make the public want what I want. This is obviously not the publisher's perspective, not the filmmaker's perspective. They want Exorcist 2, Exorcist 3, French Connection 2, French sequels. This is, as understandable as it is inevitable, and vice versa. But for those of us who are making up this stuff, the desire to push the envelope, to try different things, to experiment, to not repeat yourself, whether you're Graham Greene or Kurt Vonnegut or Jules Verne, you try different things. I'm fascinated when I read Ross Macdonald, that Ross Macdonald is writing the same book again and again and again. The names are different and some of the situations are different, but it's always an Oedipal story. And I wonder, did he ever want to try something different, or was he discouraged from doing so, or is that a genuine obsession? And how do you distinguish between, there are people who get typecast. The guy who plays Superman, typecast. The guy who plays the Lone Ranger, typecast. If you look at Long Day's Journey into Night, it's about Eugene O'Neill's father, who was typecast as an actor. He was always the Count of Monte Cristo. No one wanted to see him as anything else. How do you break out of that? Not so easy.
All right. So now that we've discussed the blending of sci-fi and mystery, as we move forward, what, if anything, would you suggest to this is your suggestion to the reader community, not to the publishers, to the readers. What, if anything, would you suggest to the folks out there who maybe have been a little bit reluctant to maybe give these blended genres a chance? What would you say to them?
I would start with, like what I was saying, I mean, Isaac Asimov is easily digestible prose. He's good at storytelling, very straightforward storytelling. The Elijah Bailey I, Robot books are detective novels. They're detective novels that happen to about having a robot assistant. They're classic detective story. The differences are the worlds in which they take place. But anybody who's a mystery reader will certainly recognize all of the conceits and tropes of a detective novel, and they're really good. I mean, the prose is not going to knock you over, but it's good, straightforward storytelling. So that's a good place for a mystery reader to dip his or her toe in if they want to read some sci-fi that is blended.
Fair enough.
Mystery.
All right, Allison, what about you?
I think everything, like I think whatever genre you're talking about, it has really basic stories at its core, and that's why we like them, and that's why we relate to them. And going back to movies, if you look at Everything Everywhere All at Once, I don't know if you've seen that, but the
Great
reason
movie.
why that movie, it has all sorts of metaverse and craziness, and it's so entertaining and crazy. But at its core, it's basically a story about a woman who learns to stand up to her father and accept her daughter for who she is. That's what it's about.
Right.
Like, you can hang any number of spaceships or robots or murders or detectives, and everything at its core is going to be, how well do I really trust or know the people that I love? How, just really, really basic stories. And I think that's what will sell you on any genre, is that one relatable story at its core. And I think that's what it takes for anything to be successful to a reader, to be enjoyable as a reader. What about where's the story? Where's the basic story between the humans within this?
All right, fair. All right, that was great, but now it's time for a special segment on the show where we spin
no,
the
it's the
wheel.
wheel.
On the wheel are 7 possible categories, which I created for this panel. Wherever it lands is what you get. And the categories are moving day, cold case, quantum leap, name that quote, Benjamin's button, magical mystery tour, and everyone's new favorite, kick him in the junk. All right, Reed, you're up first. You ready?
Sure.
All right, here we go. Round and round. Where she land? All right, and you got, Benjamin's button. I like this one. All right, this is a weird one. Okay, so you have 2 options. Number 1, much like Benjamin Button, you can live your life fully in reverse, where you were born incredibly old, and then you get younger and younger until you're a fetus. You can relive your life only knowing that any changes that you make in your past, or number 2, second choice, you can relive your life only knowing that any changes you make in your past, knowing how your life has actually unfolded, will change that life in any number of unpredictable ways, likely resulting in a life that doesn't quite look like the one that you have now. So if you had to choose life in reverse or life do-over?
You're pretty witty at this stuff. You should be a game show host. Since I'm tempted by one because my daughter is pregnant and I'm going to be a grandfather for the first time soon.
Yay!
But I would pick 2. I would pick reliving my life, but with the possibility of changing some things, like making sure I don't lose my hair.
Okay, there you go. All right, we'll get you some road.
You should remember where you put things.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Nick, you ready?
Not really.
All right, well, there we go. Nick, you got, moving day. All right, this is a new one. The forces of the universe have decided that you no longer belong in the modern world. Being the person you are now, you can travel to the past or the future. You will live out the rest of your days there. Where on the globe and in time is your new home?
I think I'd choose Paris in the 20s. The future does not look particularly appetizing to me, I have to confess. And I may be harboring some illusions. I harbor many, but something about, living in Paris when it was cool to live there sounds
Pretty good.
cool. So I
All
think
right.
I would go there.
Fair enough. All right, Allison, you ready? First time on the wheel.
No.
Here we go. There we go. Where she lands, and you got, no, we never repeat. All right, magical mystery tour. All right, so the original version of the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour album only had 6 songs. Magical Mystery Tour, Fool on the Hill, Flying, Blue Jay Way, I Am the Walrus, and Your Mother Should Know. Which one is your favorite?
I Am the Walrus.
I Am the Walrus. All right, fair enough.
Good you.
Look at you.
Look at you. All
They are
right.
the Eggman. It's just like, I love those lyrics.
Okay, you and me both. All right. That was awesome, but now it's time on the show. We're going to pick your poison. I've got 4 choices for you, and I'm not going to tell you what's behind each. I got A, B, C, or D. Allison, you're up first. A, B, C, or D?
B.
B. All right. B is success or bust. Writers often talk about, think about, and are asked about what it means to be successful. but every writer has their own definition of success, which may change at various stages of their writing careers. Given where you are today in your career, what is your current definition of success? And how does that definition compare, if at all, to when you first started writing seriously?
Well, my definition of success when I first started writing was getting paid to write. So that was like, great. Then it was being able to quit my day job, which I actually did, I think 2 years ago now. And now I think right now it's just sort of like, I'm so tired and cynical. I just want to keep working. I want to keep working. That's my definition. We all have to lower our expectations these days. So,
Okay. All right. Fair enough. All right, Nick, you're up next. So you got A, C, or D?
See, I should interject that John le Carre said, all I know is I'm happy when I'm writing and I'm not happy when I'm not writing.
I'm
Fair
all
enough.
for that definition.
That's it. I'm with you. I'm sorry. You said D, right?
I think I said C, but.
Oh, C. Oh, all right. All right. Here's one of my new favorite. All right. So C is the spoiler scenario. Spoilers have become an inevitable part of fandom. Personally, and as some of my Facebook posts should make abundantly clear, I despise spoilers in all forms. I hate them. I hate them. I hate them. But not everyone feels the same. What do you think about spoilers? And is there a preferred etiquette about how to handle them?
I hate them. I hate them. I hate them. Just to quote you. And I don't, when it says spoiler alert or something, then I stop reading. It ruins the artist's attempt at being effective if you give it away. We're so sort of goal oriented at this point that it's always cut to the chase. You try to tell a story or a joke and somebody says, well, get to the point. And I go, well, the story is the point. So I don't like them. I don't know what the etiquette is, except to, punch the other guy out.
I'm on board with that one. All right, Reed, you got A or D?
I'll take A.
A. All right. A is truth serum. All right. I'm going to ask you 10 questions. Answer quickly. You ready?
Okay.
Favorite flavor ice cream?
Vanilla.
What's one food you will never eat ever for any reason?
Fish.
Bucket list destination anywhere in the world?
Australia.
Scariest movie you ever saw?
I was 6 years old, I think, and I saw Village of the Damned.
Oh boy. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Hair.
Do you play any musical instruments? And if not, which one if you could?
I do not, and I would play the piano if I could.
Cats or dogs?
Cats.
Favorite cocktail? And if you don't drink, your favorite go-to unwind beverage?
Well, having been influenced by Raymond Chandler, I would say a gimlet.
Gimlet. All right. You can see a live performance, sports, music, theater, whatever. Any seat, any venue. What's your choice?
Oh, that's it. Does it have to be somebody present?
Nope.
Okay. I'd love to see Warren Zevon.
Ooh, where?
good choice.
The Bottom Line.
Okay. And where is that?
And it used to be in Greenwich Village, across the street from NYU.
Okay, last one. If you could bring back one TV show you feel was canceled too soon to continue its run, what would it be?
F Troop.
All right, well, I asked, so there you go.
You asked.
I did.
Oh, and let me clarify one thing just quickly. When I was making my meatloaf metaphor,
Yeah.
I was not insulting the writers. I was saying that's what publishers want,
Right.
and that, even though I know some of those authors I mentioned who get paid millions of dollars to produce those books, I know that they're doing the best they can to produce good creative stuff within those parameters that they're given.
Of course. All right.
It wasn't meant as an insult.
Wasn't taken. All
No,
right.
you, I'll
I love
insult.
meatloaf.
Them, I'm not gonna insult.
All right, fair enough. All right, so we're going to take some questions from the audience. I got one for Nick. So Nick, what should a writer take into consideration before writing a Sherlock Holmes pastiche?
Well, I think in order to write anything, you have to have a story that you think is worth telling. If you're going to write a Sherlock Holmes pastiche or imitation, you have to be really comfortable with the English language, the grammar and the syntax of that language. Presumably, you're going to do it from Watson's point of view, because most Sherlock Holmes stories, there are exceptions, are written from Watson's point of view. And you have to have an awful lot of ancillary, a sort of socio-cultural, historical knowledge about the world in which you're setting the story, bearing in mind that there is a Holmesian chronology, some details of which are hotly debated, but where and when was he born? Where did he go to school? Where are all the details that presumably you want to be congruent with your imitation? Now, there is a book I have out of camera range here called Science Fictional Holmes. So clearly this is not the total prerequisite, but those are the things I would say.
All right, very good. All right, guys. So now we're running a little late on time, so I'm going to share my screen. I got some goodies for everybody, so hang on a minute, and we'll get to the good stuff here. All right. Okay, so Nick, talk to me. What do we got?
Well, this looks to be my latest book, except the one I'm working on. It's Sherlock Holmes and Watson in Egypt in 1911. And it's about a missing English nobleman who has become addicted to archaeological mania, the search for buried treasure and cultural appropriation, if you like. So it's Holmes and Watson in Egypt.
All right, very
It's
good.
Good.
I can't wait to read it. All right, Allison, what do we got here?
Okay, that's The Collective. It's out now in paperback. It's also out in hardcover from William Morrow. It's about a woman who has been devastated by the loss of her child, who at 15 years old was basically killed by a young man who never really got any punishment from it and went on to live his best life. This has destroyed her entire life, until she finds a bunch of like-minded women online whose children were killed one way or another, whose perpetrators went unpunished. And they may or may not be helping each other out in that regard.
All right, very cool. Definitely got to check that one out for sure. And Reed, what do we got? And I've already got this one on my shelf.
Yes, Where It Hurts is Edgar and Thriller nominated novel and Seamus winning novel about a cop, of a retired cop who was sure he knew how the world worked. He was happy. His life was in order. Everything was great until his son dies of an unexpected and undiagnosed heart condition, and his world is thrown into utter chaos. And to try and regain some footing in the world, becomes a van driver at a local hotel and is pulled into someone else's son is murdered, and that person comes to him for help, and is pulled into a world of crime and corruption. And it's set in Suffolk County, where I live on Long Island.
All right, great. Well, great stuff. All right, as for me, if you're up for a little pulpy sci-fi with your private eye fiction, I will encourage you to check out my ongoing series featuring hard-boiled private eye Angela Hardwick. She is, in my mind, part Blade Runner, part Doctor Who, part Atomic Blonde, and who a reviewer said was a spiritual cousin to the J.D. Robb In Death series, so I'll thank you for that. The first 3 books include Crackle and Fire, Fractured Lives, and Hot Ash. And they are all standalone mysteries that can be read in any order, and they are all written from first person, as we talked about. There's character development throughout, so your mileage may vary depending on whether you like to be in on the beginning or not, or jump in with every plot line that leaps out. But I'm going to say this so tonight, for anyone who's watching at home, I'm so passionate about this blended genres of sci-fi and mystery. If you hit me up offline and you say that you saw this episode of the show, I will send you one free ebook of Crackle and Fire to get you taste. The first one's free. After that, you got to pay full price. All right. That's going to be our show for tonight. I want to thank my guests for coming out tonight. I want to thank, oh, hang on a second. Where do we got here? I got all my goofy stuff. There we go. There we go. I want to thank Nick and I want to thank Allison and Reed for coming back on the show. It was always a great time. I will be, if you want to see me live, I will be at Huntville, at Farpoint, Huntville Valley, Hunt Valley, Maryland, the weekend of February 10th, with more dates to come. And once again, thank you, Reed. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Allison. I hope everyone had a great time. And again, if you want your free copy of Crackle and Fire, hit me up and I'll send it to you after the show.
Thank you, Russ. Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you had a good time. It was a great hour. All right, guys.